Bueno, pues es un proyecto que nace después de varios meses de confinamiento que hemos tenido por el coronavirus en 2020. En principio, bueno, la autora se pone en contacto conmigo a través de amigos en común y me cuentan, ¿no?
Hi YouTubers, welcome to one of my videos. This is going to be a little bit unusual sort of video, and I'm going to talk about radios. But first of all, I'd like to talk about some of my history to do with me. I don't normally talk about me, but I'm going to this time. I've always been interested in radio ever since I was about 12 years old. And my first ever item I built, believe it or not, was a microwave transmitter. I found an old Mullard technical book, and in those days things like microwaves was plumbing with copper and waveguides and things like that, so it was more of soldering and cutting metal, things like that. Anyway, I built one and it was very successful. I got my first ham radio license, so I then were able to transmit on the radio amateur bands in the UK, and I used to go to a lot of the rallies and purchase what's called XPMR, private mobile radio, and this was like taxi radios and things like that, and we used to convert them to use on the amateur bands, and it was, you know, all a bit crude. There wasn't many digital, well, there wasn't any digital radios around then, and one thing or another. Anyway, in 1982 I got a ham licence. A couple of years later I went on a Royal Yachting Society Club course and got my VHF radio licence. To operate ships or yachts VHF radio. I wanted to do the second stage of the certificate, which was talking about batteries on boats, shortwave transceivers, marine telephones and all sorts of radar systems, but that course was cancelled because there wasn't enough people interested in doing it, so I never did get that. Now, my son or sons got interested in radio, and in those days most of the radios were valve and they were quite big, and I've got some photographs and I'll see if I can dig them out. This is one of my sons and he's sitting in front of an RCA AR77 or an RCA AR88 wartime, I think it is, receiver, and he's listening to the shortwave bands there, and it's a valve radio, and sitting on the top is a Trio 2200GX VHF radio with homemade speaker, and there's all sorts of different signal generators and things, and the wave meter, SWR meter, dummy load, things like that into radio. So over the years I've been involved in radio. My last spate of radio, we were doing satellite tracking, and with a friend in Northampton, and that's when the ZX Spectrum computers were around and we used those to decode the satellites. And how we used to decode the satellites was basically we received the signal on our receivers and the audio was recorded onto cassette. We then loaded the software into the ZX81 computer or the Spectrum, and we could decode the information, and the satellites we were picking up was Oscar range of satellites, which is orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio, the Oscar satellites, Eurosat, which was University of Surrey satellites, and they had speaking clocks and speaking things on which we could pick up as I went overhead. But the most important thing I did, and for me was so good, was able to get in contact with the Mir space station when it was up there. And to prove it, they actually sent me, when they were back, they actually sent me from the cosmonauts, actually sent me a postcard from the Mir space station, and also got one from UA6HZ, and I can't remember if he was a cosmonaut or he was just involved in the project. I just can't remember, but I got 2 postcards, and they came in an envelope which is just as impressive. You know, there's all the stamps on the envelope, and it's got, you know, some of the space flight things there, which I'm quite impressed with. And then I actually went and, I actually spoke to, was it Helen Sharmans or something like that? What did it say there? Yeah, Helen, can't remember her surname. So that was quite an important thing. And I'll try and find some other photos I'll add to this video of radios if I can. Now, while I was making radios and playing around with radios, more as a hobby, someone approached me and said, look, you know, why don't you turn your hobby and make money from it, as you enjoy the hobby so much? And an opportunity arose to go to Scotland for a while, and I went up to Scotland and I was working on another family business up there called Bruce Miller's in Aberdeen, and I worked up there, and we'd done a bit of everything electrical, but I used to work on the power amplifiers and ships' radios, and occasionally I'd help out with video recorders, because the company I worked for, Bruce Miller's, they used to do industrial video recorders, and they were used on oil rigs and rig support vessels, and also by Subsea International used to do little submarines, and I used to get involved with fixing some of the electrical equipment there. But I was only up there about 2-3 years, and then I moved back to Northampton, called Radio Spares, which was established in 1937, I think it was. I went to work for them, and that was in London for a short while, and then they moved to Corby and had the head office in Corby, Northamptonshire. The company then changed to RS Components Limited and started opening up across the world, and FIGs, France, Italy, Germany and Spain, and I worked for them nearly 25 years in Corby till I retired. Now then, in a couple of photos, some early photos, I'm going to put up next, and I'll just talk through it in the video. On the right hand side of me is Jim Blake, a work colleague at RS Components. Now the radio, the big large radio, is a W1516 radio I owned, and it was used in the Second World War for direction finding on the enemy, and I picked this valve amplifier up from another friend of mine. And this big old valve amplifier is very heavy, and it's not obvious in the photo, but the power supply for it is about half the size again. Now the radio on the right hand side is from a submarine. I can't remember the make, I think it's a B40, and Jim, who's alongside me, I believe was a submariner in the past. Okay, so why did I give up radio as a hobby? Well, very simply, it was, how can I put it? There's more and more digital stuff coming on the market in terms of home computers and things like that, and the interference rose tremendously where I lived. There was repeaters, cell call repeaters on the water towers near where I lived, and I just couldn't use radio anymore. I got so fed up with it, because if people are putting the TVs on and the TVs in the bedrooms on and all the computers, the interference was horrendous. You just couldn't use the radios anymore in your house unless you got a cottage somewhere in the middle of nowhere, sort of thing. And if you lived in a terraced house, it was hopeless. Plus, there was a lot of idiots on the radio bands then. A lot of people come off from CB, went on to the ham bands, and they were leaving the mics keyed up, playing music and all sorts. So I gave it up. But recently, as I've got more time, I decided to have a play with radio to see whether I would like it again, because I could probably operate it from my motorhome. And so that's what the plan. So I've made myself a small receiving aerial. It was a kit form, so I didn't make all of it. And now the technology has come on, and I've started to pick up or buy some of these low-cost digital shortwave receivers. And this is an ATS-20 battery-powered SSB, long wave, medium wave, FM, all the shortwave bands and things like that. It's got filters, and it's a digital signal processing receiver, and it's runs basically on software, and it's all digital. And I'll switch it on. A couple of things I don't like about it is it cracks and pops. It's just booting up now. There we go, it's clicking. And so I'm playing around with little radios at the moment. If I get an okay and it does work alright from the motorhome, I'm considering getting a transceiver again for a more modern compact. And the modern transceivers, or transmitter receivers I should say, are only about the size of a car radio these days. So I'm thinking of doing that, but it all depends on how I get on with these little radios.